We begin this hour in New York City. Donald Trump discussed his conviction on charges of falsifying business records earlier today. The former president telling reporters he would have liked to testify during his trial.
Now, I would have testified. I wanted to testify. The theory is you never testify, because as soon as you testify, anybody, if it were George Washington, don't testify, because they'll get you on something that you said slightly wrong, and then they sue you for perjury. But I didn't care about that. I wanted to.
His attorney, Todd Blanche, on CNN last night said he listened to us and he relied on our counsel and he reached a decision that he thought was right, which I very much agree with. That is in relation to whether they regret not putting him on the stand. Now, a jury found the former president guilty on all 34 felony counts of falsification of business records. Trump is the first former president to be convicted of a felony crime. CBS News national correspondent Errol Barnett is with me in Studio 57. So is CBS News campaign reporter and attorney Katrina Kaufman. They have both been at the courthouse following this case. So, Katrina, you were inside. Can you walk us through sort of the mood and the atmosphere, both before the verdict was read, when we found out there would be a verdict, and then after?
Well, right before that, it had been a very relaxed, jovial atmosphere. Trump seemed to be in a good mood. He was joking around with his attorney. We had actually thought that we were all going to be done for the day. The judge had said he was going to release the jury, but as soon as we found out the verdict was coming, it got very quiet in that room. The whole tone just shifted, and you could literally just feel the tension as we waited for the jury to file in and give their verdict. And then to hear the foreperson say guilty 34 times. It was just silent in there. And I was talking to one of the artists who said she was just closely observing Trump right as that first guilty was read. And she saw him close his eyes and then just slightly shake his head no. And then I was watching him throughout, and he was really just sitting there very placid. You know, normally in other trials, we've seen him have big reactions, but his eyes were just like either closed or almost closed. And he sort of puckered up his lips and just sat there very still, taking this in. And then when each of the jurors confirmed, after the foreman read them, each juror then affirmed that they agreed with these guilty verdicts, and he sort of looked at them as they did that.
Did they meet his gaze?
I don't think they met his. As the foreman was saying the guilty verdict, I was watching them a bit, and I saw a bunch of them looking down. I mean, it had to be so difficult to make this decision. There's so much scrutiny on this trial. This is such a historic moment, and I can't even imagine just how weighty it must have felt to be in that room and making this determination. A
reminder for everybody, no cameras in the courtroom, so we rely on people like you and these sketch artists to help us get a feel for the room. Errol, you've been outside the courthouse. What was it like with the atmosphere, both before and after, if you can compare the two?
Yeah, well, during the trial, I had been in the courthouse and outside on the moment that the verdict was being shared. You know, Katrina Kaufman and the other staffers were inside on a live document showing it to us, and I was on air during our special report with Nora O'Donnell as we watched that verdict come in. And what was clear is that outside the courthouse, you could hear in a distance cheering. I was about 1 block away from the park where a lot of the pro-Trump supporters had gathered, and they had been joined by anti-Trump supporters. And what we noticed is that behind me, the streets started to fill, both with pro-Trump supporters, but mostly people handing out signs calling him guilty. They even started a chant on the street saying, "Count 1, guilty. Count 2," going all the way up to 34. They then rushed the side of the road where Trump's motorcade was expected to depart the courthouse. Then we saw a series of NYPD SUVs and trucks line up to kind of create a barrier to protect him. And I think, you know, outside of those who had an animated response, you then had dozens of New Yorkers who were wondering what's going on here, who haven't been following every twist and turn of the trial. And I think that's emblematic of the country. Plenty of folks who are already in Team Trump and consider themselves, you know, MAGAs, and plenty of people who are staunchly against the former president. But a lot of folks who are just witnessing this with a sense of awe and shock now that Trump is a convicted felon.
And we know a lot of members of the public have been lining up to see court. There were some members of the public today at Trump Tower to listen. But like you said, I've been outside reporting, too, at the courthouse. Some people are like, what's going on? Right. You know, the varying degrees. In addition to being a lawyer, Katrina, you also cover campaigns. I mean, I'm sure we could pay $1 million for the right answer, but how is this going to impact things moving forward?
I mean, for one, he actually can start campaigning. And I later remembered
that... He's been campaigning.
He's been campaigning. Well, he can go out on the road. He's been in this courtroom every day, sitting in that chair all day long. And right before he came in, we didn't know it was the verdict, of course. I sort of heard his voice waft in that day saying, I want to be out campaigning. And so now he's not locked in that courtroom 4 days a week anymore, and he can actually get back on the trail, but right away he sent out fundraising messaging. And so he called himself a political prisoner, even though he has not, in fact, been sentenced to prison yet. And they say that they raised over $34 million. They say 30% of that was actually from new donors to this site. So like we've seen with a lot of his legal troubles, you know, the indictments, when he got his mugshot taken in Georgia, this just seems to bolster his base in many ways. And they've always made a lot of money at this point. So I think he's really just going to try to use this as a rallying cry to show that he is being persecuted by the Democrats, being persecuted by Biden, all of these lines that we've been hearing throughout the trial, and actually start getting out around the country.
Errol, we have to be quick here before I let both of you go. Trump and his attorney are saying they didn't get a fair trial and they should have gotten a change of venue. Remind us the makeup of the jury here.
That's right. Well, each side had an opportunity to dismiss a number of jurors, and the jury included someone who said that they got most of their news from Truth Social, which is Donald Trump's social media platform. And remember, this 12-jury unanimous verdict means they all believe Donald Trump falsified those business records and did so while pursuing office through unlawful means. And so despite Donald Trump's kicking and screaming and the fact that he and his campaign say they raised $35 million since he was found guilty, this jury found that he did commit a crime and mislead the public. So this was a jury of Donald Trump's peers. He was assessed in the same way any of us would be assessed if we had these allegations against us. And now he has the avenue to appeal, which his team says he will do.
Okay, Katrina and Errol, thank you so much. We, of course, have more legal questions, so I want to bring in Jessica Levinson to give us some of her analysis. She's, of course, a CBS News legal contributor and a professor at Loyola Law School. So help us understand how the jury came to this conclusion. What do you think were the key pieces of testimony that led to this decision?
Well, first of all, great reporting by Katrina and Errol, just bringing us inside the courtroom every day. Hearing it allowed me to answer this question, which is, I actually think it was everything. I don't know from my perspective that it was one moment. It was the prosecution being able to use a belt and suspenders approach where they knew that they had witnesses with credibility issues. They knew that they didn't have that smoking gun of Donald Trump writing a letter saying, you know what I want to do? I want to say that I'm paying Michael Cohen back. Excuse me, I want to say that I'm paying him for legal expenses, but really I'm paying him back for a hush money payment. And so I think over the course of those, 16 days, what we saw is the prosecution laying out a theory of the case and a story that just made sense. It was David Pecker's testimony in the very beginning saying, we created this plan to catch and kill stories, and it was about the election. It wasn't about burying these stories from Melania or from business partners. It was, and I frankly think this was key, Stormy Daniels detailing her story and explaining why to the jury why this is something that the voters would not have wanted to hear, or the Trump team didn't want them to hear right after the Access Hollywood tape and right before they were voting.
Or that they should have had the right to hear.
Exactly. And so I think Stormy Daniels, in detailing all those little things about the interaction, at first I thought, oh, this is a business record case. This is too far afield. And now I think she told the jury exactly what the Trump team did not want the voters to hear. So I thought that was impactful. I also thought that Michael Cohen, for all of his reams and reams of baggage that he brings into the trial, I thought he did a good job of saying basically, this is what I know, this is what I did, and what makes most sense considering everything you just heard from the prosecution.
So, Jessica, the former president will appeal. What will that process look like?
So he's going to be sentenced, then he will appeal. And I think there are, frankly, some live issues for the appeal here. You just had a conversation with Errol, I think, about the jury selection. And there are certainly some people on that jury where the Trump team thinks that they should have been stricken for cause. And that means that they could not be fair. They could not do their jobs. And then I think also the way this case was charged. Now, the DA's office was successful, but let's be honest, this was a novel theory, and there are live legal questions. This was falsification of business records. That's normal. That's typically a misdemeanor. Then you have to show intent to commit or conceal another crime. What the DA's office picked here is a New York state election violation, but we're dealing with a federal candidate. That could bring up a question. and that state election violation was unlawful interference, how did the prosecution show that you prove unlawful interference? The prosecution and the judge said you have three options. It's federal campaign finance violations, it is other falsification of business records, or it's tax fraud. And so the way the charging document reads, along with the jury instructions and this kind of novel theory, could be another big place to see an appeal. Last thing I would say is the first thing we talked about, the Stormy Daniels testimony. The defense asked for a mistrial right after that testimony, and I think we can expect to see that again in an appellate brief.
Yeah, the judge saying outside of the presence of the jury that maybe that went a little too far. Jessica Levinson, thank you.